Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today, we're going to look at the studio catalog of the very popular, legendary, influential Trouble with my guest host, once again, Mr. Martin Popoff. Martin, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Pete. How are you? Yes, very
Doing
cool.
Good.
Ready to do this.
So we get asked a lot here to cover Doom bands, and I think like Doom fans are very, very loyal, but most Doom fans like every single band that ever put out a record in that genre. So when someone asked for like last week, 2 weeks ago, I did Cathedral. As soon as I posted that, 5 people like, do Trouble, do Candlemass, do St. Vitus, do every other band, Paul Bearer, do this, that, and the other. So it's like they don't even watch the show; they just want more. So, but I wanted to do Trouble for a while because I really dig this band quite a bit, and I think they're one of the more notable ones out there. Alongside some of the ones we just mentioned, and obviously a few more. Witchfinder General, maybe, even though very minor, I think, but still fairly influential. And obviously there's Black Sabbath and so on and so forth. But we've got 8 studio albums. We're going to start off with our number 8 and work our way to number 1. I'm going to ask Martin to kick us all off with his number 8.
Okay, so my number 8. Well, I guess first of all, I want to agree with you. I mean, Trouble is one of the greatest Doom bands. I think they are the greatest Doom band. They're one of the earliest ones. You mentioned Witchfinder General. Obviously, Black Sabbath invented the whole thing. I almost always include, or I'm starting to include Angel Witch in there as well. So, Angel Witch, but Witchfinder General for sure, and then Trouble and Candlemass together, St. Vitus, Obsessed, all that. And then there was a massive sort of Doom when stoner rock all hit really big around 1995, and you started seeing really, really good bands on small labels and stuff. So, yeah. and you're right, Cathedral as well, right?
And so, Pentagram. And then there was that we totally forgot Pentagram here. Jeez, how do we do that?
Yeah. And then there's that whole My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost end of Doom too. That kind of
the more
Doom.
Gothic stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, so Trouble I consider the greatest of the Doom bands because they were early and went on and stuff. So anyway, so my number 8 of all these is this one. Simple Mind Condition. To me, obviously Eric is still in the band. This is obviously the classic Trouble lead singer is in the band at this point. This is the second one produced by Vincent Wajno. He also did Plastic Greenhead. But I just find this record to be a little sparse, a little too rock and rollsy. I think Eric's singing, he isn't doing that high shriek. It's almost like a parallel to Robert Plant from the early days to later on sort of thing. He definitely is singing, pushing a little less air and shrieking a little less. And I think the production, somehow it's a little more spare. There's more mellow tracks on it. This one actually also has the cover of Lucifer's Friends Ride the Sky on it, which is so apt for them. But you just throw it onto this album and it just sounds like another mid-level Trouble song sort of thing. So yeah, this one, and this is after a long gap, 12 years, between albums. They're looking for a record label. I just feel like the wheels are sort of falling off, and it's almost like we got to get this record out. It was recorded over a long period of time, 4 years in the making. Chuck Robinson's on bass on here. He's given them a little bit of life. But no, of the Eric albums, I just feel like this one lacks a little bit of energy, lacks a little bit of reason to be, so to speak. So there you go.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you. Simple Mind Condition is also my number 8. It's the last, to me, like you mentioned, it took forever for them to get this out. They worked on this for a really long time. It's the last with Eric and Jeff Olson. It kind of sounds like both of those guys were ready to kind of walk out the door. I don't like the production of the album at all. I think it's very kind of hollow and tinny sounded. I think Eric's vocals sound like he recorded it in a tunnel. I really just, there's not, for me, other than, the cover's pretty cool, but there's trouble when the cover song on the album is one of the better songs on the album, and it's a legendary song anyway, right? I mean, Mindbender's a good track. Arthur Brown's Whiskey Bar I actually like quite a bit. Other than that, I really don't enjoy much of the album. And it just sounds like a band in transition. It's kind of messy, and it sounds like it was kind of pieced together over a long period of time, which it actually was.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. Yeah, I agree with all that. Okay, so my number 7, I'm going to go with Distortion Field. So this is the only album with, there we go. This is the only album without Eric. So this is with Kyle Thomas, Exhorter, Vision of Disorder, right? Am I right about that? Something like that. Does a great job. He's got a really cool voice. He's got kind of like a gruff, NOLA, New Orleans sort of voice, but he's also a little bit of Eric. I thought they did a really good job on this in terms of the production's really good. It's a really ambitious album. There's some oddity to it. I love Hunters of Doom and When the Sky Comes Down. Now, granted, those have the same tempo, and I love that up-tempo sort of treble sound. But the Grain Chill of Autumn is really different, cool one. Butterflies is cool on this. But yeah, I think they do a really cool job on this. And one of the odd things about the Trouble story is in between there's the episode where Corey Clark from Warrior Soul is their vocalist, and they actually came to Toronto and saw them. I even had them over here at the office when they came up with that, but saw them live later that night, and it looked just painful. Like Corey was blowing out his voice and was going to blow out his voice. And we all looked at each other and said, this is not long for this world. I don't know if he's going to be in this band very long. And plus he's a very outspoken guy. I thought he was just a brilliant choice to replace Eric, because he comes with all his own baggage and mystique and literary and lyrical thing. I just thought it was a really brilliant thing, but it's a shame they didn't have an album. But Kyle comes in and does a great job, because at that time, right, remember, this is the excitement time around, like Warrior Soul and Trouble had that same sort of big push in the early 90s, that it looked like they were going to be massive sort of bands. And I thought Warrior Soul had this really cool mystique to him. So he was a perfect choice. He looked the part. He looked like a new age hippie, right? Like the rest of the Trouble guys. But no, I think they do a really good job on the distortion field. The production's really good. I mean, there's a little bit of they do have a new drummer again, so there's the lineup sort of degrading and breaking down, and it's been a while since we had this album. So obviously things aren't going absolutely great for Trouble at this point. And there's no real bassist in the lineup. It's the official lineup is just the four guys. You've got the two guitars, new drummer, new singer. So yeah, kind of too bad, but I did want to give it the old this is I'm gonna actually put this above an Eric album, so it's my number 7.
Yeah, it's a good album. I'm going to talk more about that in a couple of minutes, but it's crazy. It's 7 years already since that came out.
Wow.
It's crazy. And, you got to wonder, too, since it's been so long, Eric's got the Skull Band going, which a lot of people really dig. It's almost like they've forgotten about Trouble and said, all right, we're just going to kind of jump on this bandwagon and follow Eric around, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So my number 7, and again, like this part of the ranking, it could kind of change any day, but I'm going to go with Manic Frustration from 92.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of a weird album for them. This is, pretty much their like kind of psych album. It's more psych and stoner than doom. It's not very heavy. And to me, this album kind of sounds a little Soundgarden-ish. It's like 1992. So of course, you get Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana, all those bands pretty popular at the time. And it's almost like this is like Trouble's kind of version of the Seattle scene in a weird kind of way. But it's melodic. The songs are pretty memorable. The Sleeper's a great song. Memory's Garden, Come Touch the Sky is a pretty terrific song. I just think it's in their catalog. It's the one that kind of really, for me anyway, sticks out kind of like a sore thumb, but not a bad sore thumb. It doesn't hurt that much. So, but I like it. It's a good album. Just maybe it's not the doomy Trouble that we really know and love, but still decent enough.
All right. I think you're going to see a little disagreement with me. It's going to be a little higher on my list.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So my number 6 is Run to the Light. To me, this one feels like an album that is paired up. There we go with the Skull. I mean, I look at these two almost as a set piece together. They're the down the rabbit hole, down the doom rabbit hole, depressing, and this one's called Run to the Light, and even the album cover looks a little bit like a Christian metal album. So this is when they were, around this time, and more so even with the Clouds and everything, much less violent looking than the first two, right? But this is, that whole thing about being called white metal. I wore a white T-shirt for my Trouble. The Metal Voice, Jimmy Kay, it's a buddy of mine from Montreal, has a great show. But no, So this one feels a little bit almost like the really conflicted religious sort of album of theirs. If you want to, at times they would sometimes talk about this stuff. Are we this white metal band or marketed as white metal? But no, obviously they're a total doom band, and they're a druggy band and all this stuff. I mean, they're a total metal band. But yeah, there was this period where there was this tag put on them, and they kind of had to fight their way out of the tag. But no, I just find it a little bit too kind of depressing and sloggy. I find the drums have kind of a really wet sound on it. Dennis Lesh is replacing Ole Olsen on drums, right? Last one on Metal Blade, first one for Ron Holzner on bass, replacing Sean McAllister. So yeah, it's one of those, like a lot of the Genesis catalog, believe it or not, the early Genesis catalog, I think this way too, where I never feel like I master the songs or know them that well. They go into my head. I play the albums regularly through the years, and then they just drift out of the head, like the slow doomy molasses that they are at this point.
So yeah, so you and I disagree big time on this one. So it's okay. That's two in a row there. That's okay though, and it's interesting. The Genesis comparison is very interesting because I can kind of see that, because I know there are people who have issue with the Gabriel catalog. Not to derail this conversation, because it is kind of really dense and kind of out there and not as immediate as a lot of the Phil Collins era. So I totally get that. Where are we? Number 6, right? So I got the Distortion field, number 6. I think this is a good album. I think the only real bad thing I can say about this album, it's not a bad thing, it's kind of a long album. There's a lot of songs on here, right? We've talked about that to death, right? But I think Kyle Thomas is a terrific singer. To me, he sounds like Russell Allen from Symphony X. He's got that kind of real powerful roar. More of a stoner album than a doom album, but that's okay. It's got plenty of doom elements. But there's, it's kind of hard for me to separate, well, what is doom, what is stoner? And I think if you're a stoner band, you got a hell of a lot more groove than most doom bands do. And I think that there's a lot of groove to this album. The songs are catchy. The riffs are really cool and memorable. A lot of good songs on here. Few too many songs, but I think this works a lot. And it's really a shame. We talked about 7 years since this was released, that they've done nothing to follow this up. So whatever kind of momentum they had with this album is pretty much, gone by now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Trouble camp, if anything happens anytime soon. But a good album. I like it. I think I loved it when it first came out.
Yeah, a lot of problems with Trouble with momentum, right? And they all got their lives separately. They weren't a huge touring band. They've all got their careers and things they're into. And there's always been the drama with Eric, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure along the way this is really one of those lessons in career falters along the way, right? It could have been bigger, but they're so out of time, right? Let's move on. I mean, I just feel like they were never the band for the times, because they're a timeless band. I mean, they essentially sound like early Black Sabbath, right? They're this doomy, strange band. There's never been a time in history when this was really au courant and like a really cool thing to be doing, and all of a sudden we're at the front of the curve, sort of thing.
Well, they had that moment. I mean, they went on that tour with King Diamond, which is the only time I ever saw them, and that was a great, kind of a weird tour, but a great tour, because they got exposed to a lot of fans who probably would not have listened to this style of music. And then they signed to Def Jam. You think, all right, this is Trouble's big moment.
Yeah.
And didn't really go anywhere, right? It's a shame.
I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So, okay, so number 5, I'm going to go with The Skull. I just felt like this album, again, just like Run to the Light. I mean, even the guys kind of look at this record sort of warily. I mean, it is the classic original, lineup, but only 7 songs on it. I find it kind of really slow and almost fatiguing. I don't like doom when it sort of drags too much, right? And leading up to talking with you on this, I've been going out for jogs around Toronto, and I had most of the Trouble albums on my iPod Classic, and I've been playing them. But when it comes to this, it like wrecks my jog. I have to get off.
You can't work out to the early stuff. No, definitely cannot. No.
Yeah. And again, this is so down the rabbit hole and so doomy. And the guys have said, I mean, I've interviewed all these guys many times. I actually did the liner notes when these got reissued. So I think my liner notes are in this one and one or two of the other ones. I've written bios for them. But but I remember the guys saying that we were doing a lot of drugs at this period, and it kind of tells, like, this is just a really, really depressing classic Doom album, of course.
Oh, it's absolutely classic.
But after the debut, it didn't have that. It's almost like that parallel between early Rush and the excitement around Rush and Fly By Night, and then moving to Caress of Steel, right?
There's the name right there. Yeah. There we go.
So yeah, there you go. That's my number 5.
Cool. I love that. I love the cover on this album, though, I will say. Actually, all those early albums, the covers are fantastic. But anyway, I digress. All right, my number, what are we at? Number 6? No, number 5. Let's go to 1995's Plastic Greenhead.
Okay.
Fun album. Another one of those kind of stonery psychedelic albums, but couple mellow songs on there. I also feel that this album is very influenced by the Seattle scene, so it's got like a little bit of a Soundgarden flavor to me, but some pretty terrific songs on there. Title track is great. Opium Eater, Hear the Earth. Not big on the Monkees cover, I will say. Didn't think that needed to be done. The song Flowers is kind of hippie drippy, whatever, but the rest of it's actually pretty strong. Again, a little bit of a deviation from their normal sound, but it's almost like they needed it at that point in their career, right? Because you can't do, like Martin said, those first 4 albums, very much of its kind, and I think you just can't keep doing much more of that without a little kind of a break in the action. So I think that's kind of why, Manic Frustration and Plastic Greenhead, while I may not like them as much as some of the other albums, I think they were necessary and add a little bit of variety to their catalog, and they're actually pretty intriguing listens overall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'm up to number 4. So I am also going to go with Plastic Greenhead at this point. It was your 5, right? So it's my 4. Yeah. Okay. Got it. So yeah, to me, I really like this album. I love the production on it. Vince Wajno is producing this. This is again when they're bounced off of their major label path. This was originally on Music for Nations, and then I think Century Media. Looks like mine's Music for Nations. I agree. I didn't need to hear either of these covers, the Monkees cover or Tomorrow Never Knows, the Beatles cover. But I just love the heavy, blocky, chalky drums on here. I love the opening track, Plastic Greenhead. I thought Flowers was pretty cool. Opium Eater, I agree, really cool one. A couple good ones later on, Below Me and Long Shadows Fall. And I read that the order got screwed up on the booklet versus the CD, and I noticed even when I was playing it on my iPod that's actually the case. But yeah, two kind of quick paced ones later on. I just feel like on this record they still have the momentum from this being on Deaf American and working with Rick Rubin, that they still feel there's still some optimism in the band. Things are still going pretty good. It's not that long after that kind of golden period for them in terms of their career. So yeah, just a good heavy Trouble album. Accessible, the songs kind of get right to it. There's not a lot of window dressing, not a lot of that slow Chinese water torture doom to it, right? It's just it's that grooviness that you mentioned, right, Pete, about good stoner rock has great grooviness to it, and all that stuff that's coming out of Finland and Sweden when the dam breaks, right? 1995 and Century Media, and we actually get doom labels coming up at that point, right? These mid-sized doom labels. So lots and lots of great doom comes later, but this is the pioneering times when Trouble is that there's still kind of the leaders in this thing. So yeah, just a good utilitarian Trouble album, I think.
And I would say if I was going to recommend a Trouble album or two to someone who necessarily doesn't know a hell of a lot about doom but looking to get into them, and I point them towards this band, I would probably point them towards this album and one we're both going to talk about in a minute or two.
Okay. All right.
Rather than the early stuff, because I don't think that's a good starting point for anybody. Unless you're a serious doom aficionado, I wouldn't start with any of those first 3 albums.
Okay. Cool. All right, you're up.
All right, so number 4, I'm going to go with The Skull.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Martin that the first 3 albums are very oppressive. It's almost like funeral doom in spots. It's slow. It's heavy. I get all that. I totally do. But man, I just love the massive riffing on those 3 albums, even though it's slower and I'm missing that kind of groove that I really like about this band early on. But what I like about these first couple of albums is, like, even though they were heavily influenced by Black Sabbath, I don't get like a Black Sabbath feel to any of these albums. It's something completely different. I love Pray for the Dead. I think it's a great song. The title track is great, Fear No Evil. This has a really big sound to it. I love the album artwork, like I said. Again, not an album I would recommend to anybody who's not familiar with this band, but I dig it. I like others better, obviously, based on where it's appearing on the list, but I still think this is a classic, like early Doom, Jim.
Cool. Okay. My number 3, I'm going to go with the original Trouble, renamed Psalm 9 eventually, because they had another one called Trouble later, ridiculously. When this first came out, it's early Metal Blade. It's like 1984, right? Yeah, March 10th, 1984. The classic lineup. They'd already been a band since, I think, 79, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. But yeah, the Bible quote on the back and stuff. But just what was so cool about this record was that, like we were saying earlier, I mean, there's really no Doom scene or Doom bands yet. Candlemass is still coming. We had Witchfinder General, Angel Witch, Black Sabbath, The Benedict, blah blah blah. But what I love about this, Eric's just screeching and singing, high and sort of like aggressively. To me, this one, it's a little more up tempo, and it definitely kicks off really up tempo with Tempter and Assassin, and I'm not crazy about having the Cream cover on it, Tales of Brave Ulysses, but Bastards Will Pay. Really cool stuff on here. So this strikes me as a record where I often have this definition of heavy metal where it's like I think like the riff is a campfire and everybody warms their hands off of the riff, off of the campfire, right? Heavy metal is about the riff. And on here, it just feels like everybody is crowded around the riffs and just holding on with white knuckles. It just feels like a ride, a wild ride, attached to these songs. It's almost like the songs have a demonic life of their own, and the guys are just kind of there to serve the songs, and the songs just take off, and it's this strange sort of they're on this mission that previously didn't exist. It's just a really cool just a cool direction and a new kind of music almost. Produced by Bill Metoyer from Metal Blade. The productions on these first 3 albums are not great, and they're all a little different from each other, but this is kind of like a raw, mid-rangey, urgent production that goes along with just, like I say, the kind of manic mission of the song. So it's just a magic moment in heavy metal history, and you got to love it for that, just for the total historic value of it.
Yep. I totally agree. It's also my number 3. And we might get, as the Brits would say, we might get a little stick from some people who consider this like their absolute classic and one of the most classic albums in the history of Doom. And I think number 3 is pretty good when you look at overall of this whole catalog. But I agree with you. This is a classic album. To me, this is kind of like, like monolithic Doom. It's got this kind of oppressive feel to it. And the production for what it is, I think works. I think some of the production on the follow-up 2 albums are a little on the cavernous side, but I think it works on this album.
Good point. And it works, but it's not great, right? It's absolutely perfect. Yeah. For what
and they look the part, man. It's like, they look like they're transplanted out of like 1972. It's kind of like this kind of hippie metal-y look, which I think really works for them. Some great songs on here, some absolute classics like the title track, Tempter, Revelation, really good stuff. Not an everyday listen. I don't find, the early Trouble stuff is not something I could just pop on and throw in the car and go for a ride.
Very good point.
It's not that type of stuff. But man, when I am in the mood to listen to classic, slow, heavy, monolithic Doom, I love the first 3 albums for that. But yeah, it's, some people are going to say, no way, this is absolutely the best thing they ever did. I don't quite agree with that, but is it one of their best? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So my number 2, I am going to go with this one, Trouble, you know, very cool that they basically, and you know, again, you talk about looking the part. I mean, they're just the coolest looking band, period, right? So basically, really cool to see them just on the album cover, a photo. So this is their first one working with Rick Rubin, Deaf American. They're on Deaf American for this. You know, Rick Rubin, everybody I've ever interviewed, including Trouble, you know, they all kind of say the same thing about Rick Rubin. I don't want to say anything bad about him, but basically they all say he doesn't really do a lot of work. He's basically there to approve or kick out songs and listen, say, I like that, I like that. He's not a guy on the board. He's not an engineering producer. And basically he's also not even there very often. So I mean, who have I talked about Rick Rubin? Danzig, Masters of Reality, Slayer, Wolfsbane, Trouble, they all say kind of the same thing. So, so yeah, a little bit of animosity there, but you know, you can't bucket the results. I mean, basically this record is in that magic early Rick Rubin zone where he basically came up with, you know, whether it's him or the engineers he's working with, but basically on not on Rain and Blood, but definitely on South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, Danzig 2, The Cult Electric, Masters of Reality, certainly.
Chili Peppers too.
What's that? Yeah, although I'm making a point about a certain sound here, and it's not really on that record. But even the Wolfsbane album, but definitely this album, this is quintessential Rick Rubin, where you just get this massive alive bass and drum sound, this perfect amount of separation. Everything's not too far apart, but not too together. Super high fidelity, and you can tell he does have an influence on them really netting out their sound and making it super accessible at the same time. So it's basically, this reminds me a little bit of this great Phil Anselmo quote where they said about Pantera, he said, you know, there's the money riff, and he says, well, we're just going to string a bunch of money riffs all in a row. And just basically every riff is going to be super hooky. And that's one of the appeals of Pantera, I think. But to me, this record is like that. You know, The Wolf, At the End of My Days. I've seen a thing where they've said At the End of My Days is them literally trying to come out of their drug haze a little bit and just be a little more sober about what they're doing. So this is when their career is doing well. But oh yeah, just, I mean, everything on here is just so hooky and so immediate. And Pete, you made an amazing point about the fact that the first three albums are not, you just can't just throw them on at will. You have to be in the mood. This is one that you can just throw on and party to and drink beers to or whatever. It's a great party album, yet it's a doom album. So yeah, quintessential Rick Rubin sound of that magic period, and it's just a hard album for any kind of metal fan not to like. I think it's just a classic.
And I'd argue that album right there, which is also my number 2, probably next to Rain and Blood by Slayer, probably my favorite Rick Rubin production.
Yeah.
However much he worked on it.
Yeah,
I'm not, again, based on what you said, I don't know how much he had to do with it, but whatever. It's got his name on it. That's like my number 2 Rubin album right there. Yeah, I mean, it's a great album. Any Given Day could be my number 1. That is like the fun Trouble album to listen to. Mm-hmm. And like I said earlier, that if I'm going to recommend Trouble to anybody who's really not a big doom person, that's the one that I throw at them. You know, At the End of My Days, The Wolf, Psychotic Reaction, Black Shapes of Doom. I mean, and these songs are heavy. The riffs are killer. Eric's vocals are great. And there's so many tremendous grooves on this album. It's just... Yeah. It's an album you put on start to finish, and every song gets you up on your feet doing whatever you do. And that, to me, that's an enjoyable album, right? That's a successful album that kind of ticks off all the meters if you're a metal fan.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
So interestingly enough, both of our number 1s ranked really low for the others.
Yeah, bizarre. Yeah. So we're going to cause some controversy. I'm dying to see what your listeners, your viewers say in the comments. This is going to be a really cool comment section. Right, but okay, so I don't know if this is a contrarian choice or not, but anyways, I'm going with Manic Frustration, and this was never in doubt. I mean, basically my number 1, 2, In Doubt was flipping Psalm 9 and Plastic Greenhead for me, honestly. I mean, those two were close, but my number 1 and 2 in order were never, ever in doubt. I've always loved Manic Frustration, so this is the second and last with Rick Rubin, but it doesn't have a classic Rick Rubin sound. I love the daring production on this. I find they went for, you correctly mentioned that it's missing some bass, right? But it's got some seething sort of high mid-range, low treble distortion to it. It's got a really sort of crazy, frenzied, distorted, radical sort of production to it. And yeah, it is missing some bass, I think. But it's odd. It kind of almost depends on what stereo you play it on. It's a very weird record that way. But I just love the fact that it is a little more stoner rock than doom. I'm sensing a trend here in our narratives here that you are probably a little more into the doom end of it, and I'm a little more into the groovy, accessible, hooky stoner rock end of it, right? With Trouble, and I love the psychedelicness and the arrangements on it. Excuse me, what a just a stomping, cool, heavy tune. And Eric actually, I would say he has a little more of that distortion added to his voice as well, that you're hearing out of the guitar. But Come Touch the Sky probably could be my favorite Trouble song of all time. Fear was really cool. Tragedy Man, the title track. Mr. White is a really cool one later on. So yeah, just some really. I think they're really breaking away from the Rick Rubin thing. I can't remember exactly from my interviews, but I would say relations with Rick were even worse on this one, and maybe they were already on their way out the door. Trouble, these guys are very opinionated dudes, and so again, you put them in a room with someone like Rick Rubin and things are going to break down. It's a little bit like Billy Gibbons and Rick Rubin did not get along, and that broke down really quick. When they did that as well, right? But I could see how things could break down. They're all very opinionated. They all know what they want. Trouble has a certain vision. So to me, this doesn't feel like a Rick Rubin album, but if Rick did have his effect on this, I think it still could be in that classic Rick Rubin sense that he basically got them to cut the fat. He probably rejected a few songs along the way, and I think the songs are just superlative on this. So yeah, to me, the two Rick Rubin albums, again, for all the crap everybody puts on Rick about saying he does no work, in this case, in Slayer's case, I love Masters of Reality. In Danzig's case, gotta hand it to Rick Rubin. My favorite albums by bands are the ones he is part of. So yeah, that's it. So Manic Frustration, number 1.
He was doing something right, right?
Yeah.
So do you think Monster Magnet was listening to that album that you just talked about?
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, my number 1, I'm going to go with 1987's Run to the Light. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, out of the first 3 albums, I clearly enjoy this one the most. I think this album to me it's so heavy. It's so doomy. The riffs are just absolutely enormous. And I think this, for me, might be my favorite album with Eric's vocals on them. I just think he is like shrieking to them. I was listening to this the other day and I was thinking, man, it's like you put this next to like Hall of the Mountain King by Savatage, and you got 2 of the best shrieking metal voices of the 80s that don't get nearly enough recognition.
Yeah, that's
contribution to the
cool
genre,
comparison.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, both albums are just so huge, and both albums came out in the same year. Go figure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, love the title track, On Borrowed Time, The Misery Shows, the beginning, Born in a Prison is just such a crushing album. Like I said, there are days where the self-titled will probably be my favorite just because it's more immediate, but maybe it's the kick I've been on the last week or so. This album is just, for me, for today's show anyway, just ranking a little bit higher than the self-titled one. But I think they're both pretty terrific, and they could flip-flop at any time. But out of the first 3, I just dig this one a lot, and I love the cover. And it's just funny because you look at the cover and you think, oh, this is going to be a big, like, uplifting album and all this. And it's really not. But it's just a tremendous sounding doom record. And I think if you want that classic evil doomy vibe, this is my pick.
Cool. Well, you're making me want to go back and revisit that album because I respect that you have it so high. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to give it another good try.
Well, what I had, kind of the way I looked at this is I kind of like started like dissecting the catalog based on era. So I listened, to these three in succession numerous times. And I was like, all right, I clearly have a favorite here, right? And that was this one. And then I started listening to the 90s stuff, and I clearly had a favorite there. And then the latter period stuff. And I was like, all right. So I had like a definite favorite from each era. And then I wound up, putting them next to each other. And I'm like, because I'm a big Doom guy anyway, and I love that old classic Doom sound, but yet I love the stuff they were doing in the 90s too, because it's a little bit different. So it's tough because they went through some different periods where they kind of changed their music up a little bit. Yeah. It's all good. It's just a matter of, well, which one do you like better at the time you're trying to put this damn list together. So.
It's true. Those three are of a set, and I include Plastic Greenhead. That's the one thing I learned from doing this exercise. I played Plastic Greenhead a lot, and I just feel like it totally fits with the two Rick Rubin albums. I consider those three of a set, and then obviously, Simple Mind Conditions just got these sort of strange problems to it. It just doesn't feel like the band is clicking, and then of course they've got one with a different vocalist. So.
Yeah, I would say Simple Mind Condition out of all of them is the one that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb as just not being of the same quality as the other ones.
Yeah.
You really, it's actually for me, it's not a very good album, I don't think. And all the other ones, there's a lot to love there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it'll be really interesting. I think you were absolutely correct. It'll be really interesting to see how all these loyal Trouble fans rank this catalog, because it's not an easy catalog to rank with the amount of variety and things going on in there. So you know the drill. Everybody watching, in the comments below, list these 8 as you like them, or the ones that you know. I'm really interested to take a look, and Martin and I will be mining the comments to kind of see how everybody's doing. That's always a fun exercise. So Martin, thanks for joining us here today on this very fun edition of Ranking the Albums with some classic Doom from Trouble. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on the mighty YouTube all the damn time. I do want to plug one of Martin's podcasts, which just went live the other day. We actually talked about it on the show the other day here, and maybe, Martin, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I have a podcast called History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. We're up to 54 episodes, 55, and the latest one is about this concept we talked about of bands that aren't super heavy making some of the greatest heavy metal because they don't know the rules of heavy metal. So I picked 5 examples. Probably we talked about all 5 of them on that last show we did, Moxie show possibly, maybe the one before. But basically, yeah, so what I do on that podcast is we play 30-second clips of songs that fulfill my point, essentially, make my point for me, and so yeah, this last one was I've had a couple that have been touched off by discussions that we've had, so yeah, very cool.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Martin will be back on the show next week. He's coming back on the Deep Cut Dive show, so we've got in the works, we've got Black Sabbath and the Scorpions. So you don't want to miss either one of those. That's what, Thursday and Friday next week, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yep. So stay tuned for that, and have a great weekend, everybody. All right, we'll see you real soon. Martin, I'll talk to you next week.
Trouble. Yeah. All right.
Listen to some Trouble.
Right.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.